Recession, revolution, broken economies and the Occupy Wall Street movement will define the last 12 months. But can we escape the doom and gloom? Well, some say we should be going for gold, and I'm not referring to the 2012 Olympics. I'm talking about the return of the gold standard. But could we really dump the dollar? Tune into the agenda to find out. As the financial roller coaster that is the global economy continues to career out of control, pushing some European countries to the brink of bankruptcy, there are those who believe a return to the gold standard may provide the solution. The US deficit and budget shortfall are at record levels, while some of the money being printed in the West is not worth the paper it's written on. The weakened dollar was put under more pressure over Iran's decision to trade oil in currencies other than the dollar. That has dealt a severe blow to the Obama administration, but the truth is Washington can't afford to cut its ties to Iran, despite leading the campaign for trade sanctions. US presidential candidate Ron Paul is a fan of the gold standard, and he has outlined compelling arguments for its adoption and a return to money based on precious metals such as gold and silver. Malaysian leader Mahathir Mohamad called for a return to reintroduce the gold dinar into the Muslim world more than 2 decades ago. That call is now being hailed as visionary. Other international Islamic groups believe the world's economic solutions lie with a stable global currency based on gold. As the Occupy Wall Street movement spreads across the world with capitalism bankers and corrupt politicians coming under attack from angry citizens, today's agenda asks the question: the global economy. If the dollar is the problem, could the gold standard be the solution? Saddam Hussein and Colonel Muammar Gaddafi both threatened to dump the dollar, and look what happened to them. Yes, the return of the gold standard is not for the faint-hearted, and you can be sure of a head-on collision with America if you try and plot the downfall of the dollar. But since it's not worth the paper that it's written on, according to some people believe that the only solution is to go for gold. Our panel of experts will give their views on a hotly contested topic. First up is Simon Dixon, a former investment banker and economist. He is also author of Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And he's also the CEO and founder of banktothefuture.com. He blames the banks for the global recession, but cautions against investing in gold. Joining him is Robert Ould from the right-wing Bruges think tank. He says the gold standard is simply not feasible. But Professor Rodney Shakespeare reckons we should be going for gold. So quite a mixed bag of views. But I'm going to start first with Simon. You're scathing about the banks, but you're not that optimistic about going for gold either, are you?
No, well, I think it's important to understand what it is that people mean when they want to go for gold. So when you listen to people like Ron Paul, they often create this illusion that governments are printing money like crazy, and if we
aren't they?
Well, no, it's a complete lie, because governments create a tiny bit of our money. Most of the money, and the vast majority of our money, is all created privately by banks. And so controlling how much money governments make does not address the core issue, which is that we have a privately created money supply, almost entirely created by banks, which has nothing to do with what the money is backed by, or to do with who's creating the money.
Is that something that you would agree with, Professor Rodney Shakespeare? You're smiling there, and
well, if I could just correct the introduction, the obvious way forward is for gold-backed currency, not gold itself, and that must be interest-free and must be used for the real economy, and the point which everybody else misses, the spreading of the real economy. Simon is quite correct that the present system is, I'll use the word corrupt if I may, and it endlessly creates, the banks create the money, they add compound interest, they do not put it into the productive economy, and they do not put it into the spreading of the real economy, and they are responsible for what is now the huge levels of unrepayable debt.
So if gold was attached to the currency, this would stop?
It would be one factor in enabling some sort of control and introducing a mindset and practical mechanisms which start to force responsibility. But the problem is at the moment that it would still not address the key issue, which is the money supply must be used for the real economy and its spreading. Nobody talks about the spreading of the real economy to every individual in society. That has to be done.
Well, let me bring in Robert Oles, because your background is actually as an economist, Robert. What's your view?
Well, my view is that the governments have been responsible for the excessive supply of money, which has led to massive increases in inflation, particularly of assets, which have led to the high levels of debt that we find ourselves in, which are unsustainable.
Well,
really,
which
the problem,
governments? Come on, let's have some names.
Alan Greenspan in America, that just allowed for the printing of money and the ease of money supply to be increased massively. That's where the problem lies: insufficient government regulation during the times of growth, which just encouraged massive levels of lending and, of course, borrowing. That's where the irresponsibility lies in the system.
But surely, if the currency was linked to gold, then this sort of irresponsible behaviour wouldn't happen. Because you wouldn't have the gold.
If linked to gold, then it's set at a certain value. A currency needs to move up and down in its value according to the needs of the economy, according to the sort of optimal currency area that for each individual country, which they should have. But we see the problems with the Eurozone is that countries have their competitiveness, in a sense, trying to lock in their competitiveness by signing up to the euro, which is set at one value, even though their economy may demand a higher valued currency to keep inflation down, or a lower valued currency to help with their country's exports. So really we need floating exchange rates where currencies can move up and down according to their needs. But to fix that in would be a big mistake.
Simon, I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Well, we question whether money should be manipulated in this impossible thing they call interest rates, which never really works anyway. So in the current system, we need to manipulate interest rates up and down, essentially to send people bankrupt and to ask them to take on more debt, which is a completely absurd, crazy system that we operate in. And if we wanted to back that by some kind of gold, then okay, we can force more depressions and more recessions.
But the issuing of money with the terms of interest are what's encouraged the economic growth that we've had since the Second World War. That's been the position that we've been in. Yes, we are in hard times now, partly because of insufficient government regulation, but really the key to the economy is, of course, the banks issuing money to the private sector, which is the most efficient and productive part of the economy, which pays for all the public services that we have.
Well, I know Rodney wants to come in.
But that issuance has resulted in country after country over what is a 60-year cycle in unrepayable levels of debt. It is not enough that you should support a free market banking system which issues money.
Is it a free market banking system, or are we supporting the dollar?
No, it's an unfree market, corrupt, finance, capitalist banking system which does not address the issue of the productiveness of the economy and of the real economy, and never ever addresses the issue of spreading the economy.
And if we mean by productive, we mean redistributing all of our wealth to the banking system and to the wealth and to the 1%, then that's our definition of productive.
No, by productive I mean that every individual, and that includes man, women, and yes, even children, can be enabled to be productive. They can be productive via the ownership of shares, but it must be addressed to the real economy.
Let's switch our focus now to the importance of the dollar, but before we do that, Mohammed Walji takes a closer look at Iran's role in the downfall of the dollar.
In terms of own goals, the US might just have scored the mother of own goals by trying to ratchet up the pressure on trade sanctions against Iran. The Iranian oil bourse started trading oil in currencies other than the dollar just last month. It was a move that sent shockwaves through Washington, but observers in Tehran said the decision to drop the dollar was part of a long-planned strategy by the Iranian government. While some Western observers described the dollar ban as the start of an economic war with the West, supporters of Iran said it was a legitimate attempt by an independent nation to control its own currency, economy and trading relationships with other countries. But some Western newspapers, including the right-wing London Telegraph, asked if it could be grounds for war, pointing out that Saddam Hussein dropped the dollar in oil trading in November 2000. 3 years later, the US and the UK launched an invasion on the country. The latest issue of US pressure, leading to SWIFT to ban blacklisted Iranian banks, is the first time Western governments have reached so deep into the global banking system to short-circuit money transfer mechanisms. Some observers say the US, UK and others, who are pushing for tougher economic sanctions on Iran over its nuclear energy program, may have scored a disastrous own goal. While Iran may be able to find markets for such of its oil output in Asia, the alternative sources of supply to Europe are still unclear and are already sending ripples of concern around the world that the trade bans forced by the West could be counterproductive.
Robert, is it a cause for war, as the Daily Telegraph said?
Well, a lot of the responsibility for countries wanting to go away from the dollar when purchasing oil rests with the Americans that have managed to debase their own currency through excessive levels of borrowing, where the American government is deeply in debt, and some have raised questions whether they can actually pay it back. I believe they can in the very, very long term. But it would be a mistake for countries to write off America and the dollar. Yes, America's been through a hard time. Yes, the American currency has fallen back, but we see American unemployment. It's now declining. There's more people now in work in America than there was previously. Perhaps America is on the road to recovery. It's going to take a long time. They've been through some very difficult economic period.
But Iran has the third largest known oil reserves in the world today. If it switches its oil to a different currency, indeed it is, with India at the moment. They're talking about selling, I think, 45% of the oil in rupees. How damaging is that going to be if more countries start looking at oil without seeing dollar signs as well?
Well, it would be on the face of it very damaging for America. China has raised concerns about the value of the dollar, but of course, if more countries do move away from the dollar for purchasing oil and their trade in oil, then of course the value of the dollar will slip, but that would actually help America repay its debts.
So could the Telegraph be right that it could be a cause for war by Iran switching and encouraging other countries to trade in currencies other than the dollar?
Well, I think the main tensions between America and Iran do rest with the situation regarding Iran's nuclear program and the Iranian development of nuclear power, which Iran says is for their own civil purposes. America and, of course, Israel and some Arab Gulf states think differently. That, I think, is the main area of tension.
Mm-hmm. Again, I can see that you're wanting to come in, Rodney.
Well, I can't agree with that. The question, first of all, the present system is collapsing. It is fundamentally flawed, and the United States is upholding it because it benefits from that, and that the present system enables it, in fact, to fund all its wars. And yes, any sort of move towards a gold-backed currency or the agreements that you mentioned just now are fundamentally hitting at American power, and it's about time it happened because the situation is out of control. As regards the tensions, Robert, between the USA and Iran, it's quite simple. The USA objects to any state that is independent and might resist Zionism. Where everybody knows that Iran is not building a bomb. And at the same time, in all this sort of discussion, everyone forgets that Israel has 200 or 300 hydrogen and neutron bombs at the same time. So the issue really is about the challenge to the system, and it's happening now in these agreements that you referred to.
Let me bring in Simon. I mean, a challenge to the dollar's authority. How devastating would that be for the global economy?
I like to take a step back, and I think all this international pressure is really a symptom and a side effect of the fact that the underlying issue that we talk about, that banks actually create money. And because they create money, and all money is created as debt, we have a whole world of an insolvent world all battling each other for some of their debt-free currency. And really, all of these things that we're discussing here are real symptoms and guaranteed into a system where you allow money to be created as debt by a private banking system. So until we address those, we're looking at symptoms and things which are guaranteed into the system.
But the Iranian oil bourse has moved to alternative currencies. It's no longer trading in the dollar. If more countries switched to a different currency, say the euro, and oil trade started going through the euro, how devastating would that be to the dollar, and what sort of impact would it have on the ordinary person in the street?
Yeah, well, I'm against any kind of monopoly, and while it may not be good for the states, they've got to look out for their own countries, and I'd encourage that as well.
I mean, Robert, those who've tried don't have a good history. I'm thinking in particular Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, both no more.
Well, they were driven by their political conflict with America that took them to make the decision to move away from the dollar. But that would be a mistake, because the dollar will be probably one of the world's reserve currencies for the next century. I'm sure that would be the case.
You can't see the euro replacing the dollar.
The euro is in a process of collapse, and of course the euro is threatened itself through, of course, the issue of sanctions on Iran. The European Union and its common foreign policy is looking to restrict Iranian
imports. But of
imports.
course now we've got this conference which is taking place in India with the emerging countries, Brazil, Russia, India, those countries, and they are talking about establishing an independent banking system outside of the global one. How serious a threat is that to the dollar?
Well, it's very dangerous when countries set up transnational currencies which aren't backed up by an independent central bank properly, such as that's been a problem with the euro. There has been a restriction in the amount of euros that existed because the European Central Bank wouldn't be creating enough money to spread throughout the Eurozone. Well, that's now changed, but to have a new euro on a global scale would be a disaster.
Right, okay. Well, sorry to interrupt,
Sorry.
but as usual, our Facebook followers inundated us with their views on today's topic. Mohammed Walji reads out the best from our electronic mail room.
Thanks, Yvonne. Well, another hot topic and another huge response. Agenda's Facebook fans wanted to give their penny's worth over today's subject. Egyptian Sama Helmi predicted the economy is going to crash, whether it's because of the bankers or because of the system of usury that we follow. For sure, we have to deal with the gold, dinar or silver, a thing that really has a value, instead of making money from thin air and then be forced to be in debt. Arab-born Abdullah Ahmed said, the gold dinar is a good option for a new banking system such as Islamic banking. The gold dinar was used by the Muslim world as far back as the second Caliph Umar until the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. And Scotsman J.R. Hartley from Edinburgh digs into the past for his inspiration. He says, we should never stop using gold in the first place. Doubt it will go back now. Too many pockets getting lined with the current system, so doubt the powers that be would allow such a change, but we can always hope, right? Nadeem Dawood from Kingston University in London added, it's increasingly clear that we need to return to the gold standard, especially in this time of desperate instability. A gold standard would mean 100% backing of currency with gold reserves, eliminating any possibility of creating currency from thin air. However, returning to gold alone is not the solution. We need to get rid of institutions such as fractional reserve lending, subprime lending, and the whole derivatives model, to name but a few. And Hassan Ayub, studying at the American University in Beirut, reckons, your question is the reason why Gaddafi is dead now. Fazal Dinos from Blackburn agrees, adding, it's impossible to bring the gold dinar currency. The ones who tried got killed in the process, i.e. Saddam Hussein and Colonel Gaddafi. And Londoner Mujahid Rashid is now concerned about the safety of the agenda presenter. He says, sister, please don't start discussions on gold money. Dollar owners will always react badly, i.e. look at the recent example of Colonel Gaddafi. Well, on that note, that's all we have time for. Back to you, Yvonne.
Well, in the last few minutes, let's get our guests' concluding remarks. If I start with you, Simon, and of course the question was, if the dollar is the problem, could gold be the answer?
Gold's not the answer. There's three things that I think we need to address. The first is that when you deposit your money with a bank, they become the legal owner of your money. When they become the legal owner of your money, the second thing is they get to allocate it as they wish through where they issue loans. The third big problem is that banks actually create money. Gold does not solve any of those issues and therefore will not solve the problem.
But any viewer listening to you will be saying, well, I may as well just shove it under my mattress then.
they can shove it under their mattress, and that might be the right thing for them to do.
And in terms of currency, can you see any currency that could replace the dollar?
Well, no, I mean, everything that's happening right now is moving to a consolidation of power to large organisations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. As we're seeing central banks bail out the banking system, we're just seeing this big consolidation.
That's the role of the central bank to underpin the banking system.
With each one, we get more power. And we get, smaller currencies disappearing, smaller currencies, and that's more power to centralised, consolidated power.
Well, let me bring in Robert for your conclusion in all of this. Do you see the dollar reigning supreme for many years to come, or where do you see the threat coming from?
Well, the threat itself
will be the answer.
The main threat to the dollar will come from the Americans and excessive public spending, excessive borrowing, and the money being made far too freely available. That's where America had gone wrong in the last few decades. Hopefully, America will learn. They had a shock in the last summer where they nearly became a default country where they couldn't afford to pay their debts. America must support the dollar and not debase their own currency. But the banking system, their role of lending out our money is what drives economic growth. When they lend out their money on sound commercial gains to the financial sector, that is what allows people to invest in the economy.
But unfortunately, most of that goes to people buying shoes on credit cards and property speculation.
Well, it's asset price inflation, which is resulting from the property speculation.
So surely it would be better if the currency, whatever currency, was attached to gold.
Well, it's just a matter of the central governments and their central banks making sure that the money isn't too easily available. Of course, at this moment in time, we need money to be made available to the economy to kickstart economic growth, which is non-existent in many Western nations, Europe and America. But we do need a productive financial sector, and that comes from loans from the banking system.
Let's go to our binary economics professor. Rodney, what do you see the future of the dollar? Do you think that there is another emerging currency which could take over? Or, what about the return of the gold dinar?
Gold-related, the gold dinar is just literally gold, but gold-related currencies certainly perhaps are on a bit of a roll at the moment, and that will continue. The key issue then is that whatever is the currency, it is who issues it, for what purpose, on what terms, and to whom. Issues like whether there is compound interest and whether the money is done just for speculation. Now, those are the real issues. And unfortunately, even the BRICS, which are meetings mentioned in India today, I doubt whether they're really considering the detail of that sort of issue. But that's the key issue for the future of this world. Otherwise, you'll never eliminate poverty. You will never eliminate rich-poor division.
Well, on that note, that just remains for me to say a very big thank you to each and every one of our guests today, bringing an end to this current series of The Agenda. Thank you very much.